To start with, we're looking at Eliphaz has made his comments, and chapter 16 and 17, Job is going to respond again, like we have seen many times. But before we look at that, I want us to see that all this repetitive back and forth that we have in Job, I'm going to ask a question, and I want an honest answer. Has it seemed a little monotonous and boring that it's the same thing? They comment, they attack, he responds over and over and over. And a lot of what is said is very similar to what was said in previous chapters. Does it seem that way? But we've talked about it, that God put it in here. There's got to be a reason for it. And as we go through, you're searching, you're digging, and it's like, why is this? Well, each step we go a little further, we start seeing more and more reasons for why this is happening. And God has something important in here that He wants to teach us from the book of Job, obviously, or He wouldn't have put it in there. And the study book I'm using has a similar story about a man who is dealing with a little bit of the same thing that Job is. And I want to share that story to help us see how God can work through our difficulties. Because He can, and He will, and He does do that. I know we have all heard of William Tyndale. He was a Bible translator back in the 1500s, and he was a Bible scholar, and he had a passion for the Scriptures. But all of the Scriptures were in Greek and Hebrew, so only certain people could read it. And William Tyndale wanted to translate the Bible into the common language so that everyone could have it and study it and read it. Well, back in those times, King Henry VIII, mind you, there was 8 King Henrys, 8 Henrys. You'd have thought his parents would have got creative and changed the name somewhere along the line. But King Henry VIII did not like what Tyndale was doing. He did not like him translating into a common language so everyone could have it. I'm not sure what his hang-up was, but Tyndale in 1524 decided he was going to flee to Belgium, so he could be safe and not be arrested. He might have used a Belgian to get there, but he went to Belgium. Then while he was over there a year later in 1535, Tyndale met a student from England. His name was Henry Phillips. And this young man came to Tyndale and said, "Man, I'm really interested in Bible translation. I want to learn all that I can about what you're doing and maybe even help you with that." So Tyndale and Phillips became close friends. And one evening, Tyndale and young Phillips decided they're going to go down the street and get something to eat. Unbeknownst to William Tyndale, this Henry Phillips was a plant from King Henry. And as soon as Phillips opened the door to the restaurant, 2 guys grabbed Tyndale and arrested him and took him back and threw him in jail. So Tyndale was betrayed by his friend, who he thought was his friend, kind of like Job has been betrayed by his friends, even his wife. Tyndale spent 16 months in prison. And then the king decided on October 6th of 1536 that he was going to be executed. But just before this happened, Tyndale said, "Lord, open the king's eyes." That was his prayer, just before he was executed. Now, obviously, Tyndale didn't know this happened, but 3 years after his death, God answered his prayer. The king changed his mind, and the Bible was translated into common language so that everybody could have it. So, and the majority of the translation was Tyndale's. So, we can see God can work through things that just seem like, well, this is not how it should have worked out. This was hopeless. This was worthless, that all he did, and then this wicked king executed him. But God used it. Whether the king saw William Tyndale's, he didn't see Tyndale's anger at him. He just saw Tyndale's faith in this God he served that is in the book he was translating. We don't know for sure, but the king changed his mind. So what we see here is that God can use suffering and even death to further his plan and his kingdom. And we can't see that. We can't see the beginning from the end like God can. So I want us to, as we look at chapter 16, we've talked about Job's mental state, what he's dealing with, his suffering from the health issues and from just the mental anguish of it all has pushed him to a point where he's kind of desperate. And I'm sure we've heard this saying that there's nothing more dangerous than a desperate man. Now, Job is not dangerous, but he is desperate. He's looking for relief. He's at such a low place, he feels free to just speak his mind. And what we're going to see is he is flat out angry at God. He feels abandoned by God, and he's telling him that. And that's because he's desperate. His friends have continued to attack, Satan's attacks, and he's just being quite honest with God about what he's facing and what he's dealing with. So the first thing we want to look at here, Job 16, we're going to read verses 1 through 5. The heading of 16 says, Job reproaches his pitiless friends. He's just trying to help them see that what they're doing is not helping in the least. Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall words of wind have an end? Or what provokes you that you answer? I also could speak as you do. If your soul were in my soul's place, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you. But, verse 5, but I would strengthen you with my mouth, and comfort of my lips would relieve your grief. I've wondered, I thought about this 5 verses here, how his friends have not given any comfort. They have just constantly, well, this is what's wrong and this is what you need to do. And this is my take on it. I don't know if it's correct. But when we come to verse 5, Job says, I would strengthen you with my mouth. I would comfort you to help relieve your grief. And I think with him being on the opposite end, he can see when you say you're going to comfort someone, you need to realize you're not God. We can't fix people. Only God can. we need to comfort the way God shows us to comfort. And we're going to look at that a little later here in the lesson. But the words in here, and I like this analogy that was used. It says, to start, we see Job's words are dripping with sarcasm, anger, and pain. An example that came to my mind, when you have waffles or pancakes and you smother them with syrup and you pick it up, the syrup's just dripping off of it. It's saturated. Job is being sarcastic. He's showing his anger and his pain. And it's very easy to see. It's just saturated with it. It's dripping from what he says. But these, these words are coming from a man who's been tried and tested like no one we've ever known. And I ask this question here. Why did God allow this to happen to Job? For him to suffer so bad? God must have seen fit to set the standard so high and the suffering so great that no one who's going through suffering can say, well, nobody's had it as bad as me, or nobody's had to go through what I've had to go through. God put Job in his word for us, for all of humankind, for as long as God leaves us here. So he has this in here for us to realize that even if we're going through horrendous suffering, as we go through the book, we see how Job continues to hang on to God. And at the end, he will be vindicated. Now let's think about Tyndale. He was a man of God. He was seeking to do God's work. He died for his faith. But God used that in some way to wake up King Henry VIII. And the Bible, what we have, came about. So God doesn't always do things the way we think he should, but he is always in the background. Well, I wouldn't even say the background. We just can't see it. He's always there working, doing what he desires for his plan to further his will, his gospel in everything that happens. Oh, there's kids next door. I thought, what was that? So even though Job was frustrated, in verse 5, we already mentioned it, he says that I would not do this. He says to his friends, if you were in my shoes, I would not treat you the way you're treating me. So Job is learning. He is noticing things that are taking place, and he's learning from it. The next passage, verses 6 through 17, Job is feeling abandoned. Now, if you're abandoned, you use that word, you're feeling quite alone, like you're as far away from anyone as you can get, and it's just you and your misery. He is feeling abandoned by who? His friends, his wife, the God that he loves, because he hasn't heard from God. So at this point, he is feeling abandoned. Verses 6 through 17. Though I speak, my grief is not relieved. And if I remain silent, how am I eased? But now he has just worn me out. You have made desolate all my company. You have shriveled me up, and it is a witness against me. My leanness rises up against me and bears witness to my face. He tears me in his wrath and hates me. Who's he speaking of there? He's speaking of God, isn't he? He's angry with God. He gnashes at me with his teeth. My adversary sharpens his gaze on me. We've heard it mentioned numerous times that Job feels like God is focusing way too much on him, just watching for him so that he can say, you failed again, right there. That's how Job feels. Verse 10, they gape at me with their mouth. They strike me reproachfully on the cheek. They gather together against me. God has delivered me to the ungodly and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. Verse 12, he remembers prior to this disease hitting him. Says, I was at ease, but he has shattered me. You know, when I read that first part of verse 12, I got to thinking, being at ease, and how we talk about when we go through difficult times, we can learn, we can grow from it, and we can come out the other end better spiritually. We can grow from it if we seek the Lord's guidance as we go through it. Job is remembering this. He said, I was at ease, but he has shattered me. Now notice, from here to the verse 17, he mentions some pretty graphic things that he feels are happening to him. He says, he also has taken me by the neck and shaken me to pieces. He has set me up for his target. His archers surround me. He pierces my heart and does not pity. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with wound upon wound. He runs at me like a warrior. He says, I have sewn sackcloth over my skin and laid my head in the dust. My face is flushed from weeping, and on my eyelids is a shadow of death. And in verse 17, although no violence is in my hands, and my prayer is pure. So he has just lashed out at God mightily. This is how he feels. This is what he is envisioning is happening to him. He's been grabbed by the neck. He's been shaken. He's been pierced. He's worn out. He refers to God as his adversary, his enemy. And he said, you have shattered, shaken, shot at, and you have sliced me. He is suffering bad. And he is angry at God. He's had it. But Job is not the only godly man who has been angry with God. Think of Jacob in the Bible, in the Old Testament, back in Genesis. I'm going to give a quick rundown. Well, first of all, when you think of Jacob, what are some things in his life that come to your mind? Things that he had to deal with? Laban. Father-in-law, wasn't it? Became. Yeah. Laban switched daughters. He had to serve 7 years. Then he switched and he had to serve 7 years for Rachel, that's who he wanted to marry. That's who he thought he was marrying. That's one thing. Anything else? Wrestled with God. That's clear at the end. You jumped from the beginning. You read the last chapter of the book all the time, don't you? Yeah, he wrestled with God. Would you wrestle with God if you weren't upset and desiring something from him? Probably not. But I just want to run through a few things that Jacob dealt with right from the very start. Jacob and Esau were twins. Esau was born first, and the Bible tells us that Jacob grabbed Esau's heel as they were born. Because what happens eventually? Who's going to get the inheritance? Esau or Jacob? Esau was born first, right? So who should get it? Esau. Well, it starts from birth. Jacob was hanging on to his heel like, I want that. Jacob fools his father by putting goat hair on his arms and gets the blessing that was supposed to go to his brother Esau. Do you think that made his brother happy. His brother Esau was I don't remember if it says he was a ruddy man. He tended sheep. He was a hunter. He was a provider. He went out and got the food and all of these things. Esau was not happy with his brother. Jacob stole the blessing from their father Isaac. You mentioned he served 7 years to his father-in-law to get Rachel. And his father-in-law, they must have covered their face and everything. And when the wedding was over, it was Leah, not Rachel. So Laban says, serve me another 7 years and you can have Rachel. So he did. So, kind of came back to bite Jacob by being deceiving and stuff. He was deceived. So then Jacob, who was tending the sheep for his father-in-law and taking care of things, there's more of a story to it, but Jacob angered Laban and his sons because Laban asked him to take care of his sheep, and Jacob did, but he said, I'm going to take the certain ones, just certain ones he was going to take for himself. And they were spotted and colored. And then if there was a white one in his flock, then Laban would know he had taken some from him. Well, what Jacob was doing was, it seems to me, what I read, he was using better genetics in his flock and not so great in Laban's. I think because he was angry with Laban. Because Laban's herd became weaker and became less. They weren't having lambs. Well, if you don't have babies from the livestock, then your flocks don't grow. You have nothing. So Jacob did that and angered Laban and his sons. And he came after Jacob when he was in his 90s. Laban was coming after Jacob and his family. Also, right about this time, he was told by his servants that Esau was coming to see him. And he had 400 men with him. Why would that cause Jacob to be a little concerned? You think he still remembers? Clear back when they were kids? Yeah. So anyway, Jacob was afraid of Laban and his sons. He was also afraid of Esau, who was coming to meet him. And in Genesis 32, 22 to 29, so Jacob, what he did, this is what was coming. He had Laban and his sons, Esau and his 400 men. They're coming to see him. So Jacob is trying to figure out, what am I going to do? So verse 22, it says, he, Jacob, arose that night, took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, crossed over the river. He took them, sent them over the brook. And then in verse 24, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now, when he saw that he did not prevail, this is speaking of this angel of God, saw he didn't prevail against him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of his hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he, the angel of God, said, let me go, for the day breaks. Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Jacob was afraid. He was scared. And he was seeking wisdom, guidance from God, a blessing from God. So he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. So Jacob was angry with God because of things he dealt with in his life. Some of it he brought on, but he was angry. He was scared. But he was an old man. He was 97 at this time, and he was wrestling with the angel of God. Another man that we can think of who was angry at God is Peter in Acts 10. Acts chapter 10. Peter was a godly man. He was used of God in many ways. And when we start here in chapter 10, verse 1, when we hear about Cornelius, let's notice there and see who he is. It says, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. Now it's a capital G. So Cornelius is a Gentile. He is a centurion. He's Roman. But he has turned from pagan gods, and it says right here, he is worshiping the real God. So that's who he is. Now, Peter gets a vision, and in verse 12, in this vision, it says there were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Notice verse 14. But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." You think back to the Old Testament times and Jewish culture and their religion, the way they served. There were things that they were considered unclean and common that they were not to eat. But so he says, "No, Lord, I don't want to do this." And the voice spoke to him again the second time. "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." Then this was done a third time, and then this vision went away. So while Peter thought about this vision down in 19, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down and go with them." Notice, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. God sent them. This vision was on purpose. So then over in verse 25, Peter meets Cornelius, this centurion, this Roman. As Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshiped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up. I myself am also a man." And as he talked with him, he went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, "You know how unfaithful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean." Remember back at chapter 10, verse 1, what it said about Cornelius. Yes, he was a Gentile. Yes, he was a centurion. But he had gave up his gods and is worshiping the true God. It says he was a man who feared God with all his household. What was God trying to teach Peter here? He was trying to teach him that Gentiles too can come to God. They can change. That's why he said there, the end of 28, God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Now, we are known by our fruits, right? There are Gentiles still at this time that are still worshiping pagan gods. Then, down to verse 34, Peter is preaching to Cornelius' household. It says, then Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. So it doesn't matter your lineage, your background. If you will humble yourself and accept God and do works of righteousness, you are accepted in him. So this was a big deal for them at this time. But Peter was angry up there in verse 14. Not so, Lord. I can't do this. This is against what we've been taught. But God taught him a lesson through that, and then in turn used him to help build and encourage the lives of Cornelius and his family. So God can use things to bring about his will and his plan to come the way he wants it. So something that we see here, we can see being angry with God can bring about spiritual growth. And I'm going to share another phrase here, and then I'm going to stop because I'm not going to be able to get through all of it. And this is a part I really want us to grasp and understand. When we get angry with God, God can bring about spiritual growth in us if we will allow him. And I want to share this with you, and I would like you to think about it this week. Maybe our anger isn't actually directed towards God, but it's out of our idolatrous concept of him. How do we picture the God we serve? Do we picture him as a genie in a bottle? Or do we picture him as a God, a creator? He's provided a savior. Anyway, think about that this week, and we're going to go through that more deeply next time. But it just, I don't feel like Job at this point has looked at God as, well, you took everything away and I need my things. I don't see that from Job. I just see that he's suffering mightily. But many times when we are suffering and we get angry with God, it's like, God, if you'll do this, I'll go to church every Sunday, Wednesday, whatever, Thursday too. I'll even be nice to the pastor. Amen. I mean, that's just a silly analogy, but we can do that. If you do this, I'll do that. That's not the right mindset of who God really is. So anyway, anything anyone wants to add? I'm looking forward to next week because this has been working on me all week, and I've struggled with just putting it all together. All right. Well, let's close in prayer, and we will go to our next service. Father, I thank you again for your word. The so many examples of you leading and guiding and working through people who are suffering, people who are scared, people who are angry. And you use these things to teach them. And not only to teach them, but to bless others along the way. And so grateful that we have this as a reminder, because we are human with a sin nature and your word. And just thankful for that. Thankful for each one who is here today. Just pray that you would help each of us to take from this what we need to help us to grow and be more useful for you and more strengthened in our walk. And Father, as we go to the next service, I just ask that you would meet with us, that you would also just be giving Pastor guidance as he shares your word again, and that in our song service, as we worship you through music, that you will be honored and glorified through everything that we say and do. In Jesus' name, amen.